right, guys. I've not done as much Fablehaven as I should have done, so I apologize. So I'm going to do a Fablehaven today, and then I'm going to make a fort for tomorrow, and we're going to do Fablehaven in the fort. I hope you guys are all making forts and having fun with our Scholar Spirit Week. So here we are, Chapter 10, An Uninvited Guest. Fablehaven. Okay, here we go. Grandpa leaned back in his wheelchair, tapping his lips with the safe end of a fountain pen. You know how you kind of tap your lip? Kendra and Seth sat in oversized armchairs, and Grandma was behind the desk. Kendra and Seth had not seen Grandpa the previous night. Grandma had taken them to a fondue restaurant after their meeting with the Sphinx, so they had not returned until well after dark. Our story is that you were fairy struck, and that there were some residual effects from the incident, Grandpa said, ending the contemplative silence. It sounds perfectly plausible, and will make you less of a target than if word gets out that you are fairy kind. Obviously, we never let on that the diagnosis came from the Sphinx. We do not mention him at all to anyone. So instead of telling people that she's very kind, they're just going to say that she's very struck so that people aren't after her. Coulter already knows that we went to see him, Kendra confessed. What? Grandma leaned forward. Ye already told me, Grandpa said. Ruth, he was trying to teach the lesson that spies could be anywhere, eavesdropping on conversations, and in the process learned about the Sphinx. The secret will be safe with Coulter, but he need not hear any further details. No discussing it outside of this study. So a study is like an office, a room. So if anyone asks, Kendra was fairy struck, Seth said. If someone knows enough to ask and deserves an answer, then that is our story, Grandpa reiterated. Now I hope we can get back to business as usual. Tanu is off scouting some unexplored territory. Coulter has an outing specifically for Seth, and Kendra can assist Vanessa with research. Research? Kendra asked. Here in the house? Seth bit on the side of his hand. He was choking back laughter, which only served to inflame Kendra's indignation. She's going through some journals, Grandpa said, following up on hints left behind by Pat and Burgess. Why can't I go with Coulter? It's not fair. Can't you make him take me? Coulter is one of the most stubborn men I know, Grandpa said. I have serious doubts whether anyone could make him do anything. But I'm not sure today need be an issue for you, Kendra. I suspect that you would rather skip this outing of your own accord. You see, a certain fog giant shared a valuable lead with us, and in return, we promised him a live buffalo. So, Coulter, Seth, and Hugo will be handing over a buffalo to the brute to be instantly devoured. It will be a gruesome sight. Awesome, Seth whispered reverently. Okay, well, I guess I don't mind skipping that, Kendra admitted. But I still don't like the idea of being left out of Coulter's excursions. Complaint noted, Grandpa said. Now, Seth, I don't want this Olok's a glutton business keeping you up at night. The Sphinx is right. The walls of Fablehaven will be sufficient protection. And if he says he will help us take care of the glutton once the demon shows up, then I see no cause for worry. Sounds good to me, Seth said. Well then, Grandpa said, off you go. Seth kept glancing over his shoulder at the buffalo they were leading along the path. Huge, shaggy head, short white horns, bulky body, plodding gait. He had never appreciated what large animals they were. Had Hugo not been leading the beast with the bridle, Seth would have scrambled up a tree. They had started out on paths that Seth knew, but quickly turned down unfamiliar roads. Now they had reached lower, wetter terrain than Seth had ever seen at Fablehaven. The trees had more moss and vines, and the first shreds of unexpected mist eddied close to the ground. Seth clutched his emergency kit. Alongside the more conventional contents, Tanu had added a small potion that would boost his vigor if he became exhausted. This morning, Coulter had added a lucky rabbit's foot and a medallion that was supposed to repel the undead. Is this rabbit's foot really lucky? Seth asked, fingering it. We'll see, Coulter responded, eyes scanning the trees. Are you superstitious? I like to cover my bases, he said softly. Keep your voice low. This is not a hospitable area on the preserve. Now might be a good time to put on that medallion. Seth fished the medallion out of his emergency kit and slipped the chain around his neck. "Where did Hugo find a buffalo in the first place?" he asked quietly. "Oh, there's a complex of corrals and stables on the preserve," Coulter said. "Not filled to capacity, but with plenty of animals for Fablehaven to remain self-sufficient. Hugo does most of the upkeep. He brought the buffalo from there this morning." "Do you have any giraffes?" "The most exotic it gets are ostriches, llamas, and buffalo," Coulter said, "along with the more traditional livestock." The mist was getting thicker. The air remained warm, but the cloying smell of decay was increasing. The terrain became soupier. Seth began spotting clusters of fuzzy mushrooms and rocks slick with slime. Coulter pointed to a path diverting off to one side. "Normally in Fablehaven, you are relatively safe if you stay on the path. But that is only true of the real paths. That path, for example, was created by a swamp hag to lead the wary to their doom. So some swamp hag had made a fake path that if you traveled down it, they would get you." Seth stared at the narrow trail meandering off into the mist, trying to memorize it so he would never make the mistake of following it. They did not go much farther before Coulter stopped. "We are now at the edge of the great marsh of Fablehaven," he whispered. "One of those most perilous, least explored areas on the preserve. A likely region for the inverted tower to be hidden. Come." Coulter stepped off the path onto muddy ground. Seth squelched after him with Hugo and the ill-fated buffalo bringing up the rear. Up ahead, through the shroud of white mist, a geodesic dome came into view. The grid of triangles that comprised the dome appeared to be composed of glass and steel. In form, the structure was similar to the domes of interlocking metal bars Seth had seen on playgrounds. So it was kind of like a big glass dome. "What's that?" Seth asked. "A safe hut," Coulter said. "Glass domes strategically placed in some of the most threatening areas of the preserve. They provide the kind of refuge we enjoy back at the main house. Nothing can enter uninvited." They walked about 10 yards past that. "Hugo, picket the buffalo here," Coulter ordered. "Then stand watch from behind the hut." Hugo produced a stake the size of a fence post and thrust it deep into the ground with a single powerful motion. The golem then fastened the buffalo to the stake. Coulter shook something from a pouch into his palm, then cupped his hand near the buffalo's muzzle. "This will anesthetize him," Coulter explained. Next, he produced a knife and slashed the buffalo on the shoulder. The buffalo tossed its heavy head. So anesthetize means it's going to make it so he doesn't feel any pain. A deep roar came echoing out of the mist. "To the hut," Coulter murmured, wiping the knife clean before stowing it. He tossed the rag that he had used to wipe the knife near the buffalo. The symmetry of the glass dome was broken only by a small hatch in one side, also made of glass and framed in steel. Coulter opened the hatch and crawled in after Seth. The hut had no floor, just the bare earth. Hugo waited outside. "We're safe in here?" Seth asked. "As long as we don't break the glass from the inside, no creature can get us, even a fog giant in a bloody frenzy." "Bloody frenzy?" "Oh, you'll see," Coulter assured him. "Fog giants go mad around blood, worse than sharks. This tribute is the price we agreed to pay for the information Burlox gave us about the marshland. After the tribute, he has promised us one more piece of information." "Burlox is the giant?" "The most approachable of them, yes." "What if the wrong giant takes the buffalo?" Coulter shook his head. "Oh, fog giants are highly territorial. Another would not encroach on Burlox's domain. Their borders are clearly defined." Despite the condensation on the glass and the intervening mist, Seth had a good view of the buffalo. It was grazing. "I feel bad for the buffalo," Seth said. "Like most livestock, it was born to be slaughtered," Coulter said. "If not by a fog giant, by your grandfather. The anesthetic will dull its senses. The fog giant will administer a quick death." Seth frowned, staring through the glass. What had sounded like fun back at the house no longer was very appealing, now that he recognized that the buffalo was an actual living animal. "I guess I ate hamburgers all the time," he finally said. "Oh, this isn't much different," Coulter agreed. "Somewhat more dramatic." "What about the rules of the treaty?" Seth asked. Won't you get in trouble for killing the buffalo? Well, I won't be doing any killing. That will be the giant, Coulter explained. Besides, the rules are different for animals. The treaty was meant to keep sentient beings from committing murder and casting spells on each other. The same protection does not extend to animals of a lower order of intelligence. When the need arises, we can slaughter animals for food with no repercussions. Another roar sounded, much closer and more intense. A gargantuan shadow loomed beyond the buffalo. Here he comes, Coulter breathed. Seth's mouth went dry. As the fog giant emerged from the mist, Seth found himself scooting to the far side of the small dome. Burlock's was enormous. Seth was not much taller than his knee. Hugo was shorter than his hip. The buffalo suddenly looked like a house pet next to the giant. The fog giant had the proportions of a heavy-set man. He wore tattered, matted furs, and his body was smeared with oily muck. Beneath the filth, his skin was a sickly bluish gray. His long hair and beard were tangled in slime. In one hand, he bore a crude, heavy club. The overall impression was that of a fierce, battle-weary Viking who had lost his way in the swamp. Kind of like this, maybe? Oh, nope. It's on our other book cover. Remember our other book cover that had the fog giant on the front? Not Olok the Gun. I was looking at the wrong book. Okay. The giant stopped near the buffalo. He turned and looked toward the dome, giving a single nod and leering like you're staring kind of evilly. Seth was acutely aware that a single swing of the huge club could bash the hut to smithereens. Burlock tossed the club aside and then pounced at the buffalo, tearing off the bridle and hoisting the flustered animal into the air. Seth looked away. It was too much. He heard a noisy combination of bones crunching and flesh tearing before clamping his hands over his ears. Part of him wanted to watch, but instead he kept his head down and his ears covered. You're missing it, Coulter eventually said, kneeling at his side. Seth peeked. The buffalo no longer looked much like a buffalo. Sections of the hide had been cast aside and jutting bones were visible. Seth tried to pretend that the leg Burlock was mauling was a gigantic spare rib, and that the feasting giant was drenched in barbecue sauce. Not something you get to see every day, Coulter said. True, Seth conceded. Look at him munching away. He can't eat it fast enough. He rarely gets meat of this quality. He ought to slow down and savor it, but the brute can't help himself. It's pretty disgusting. Just one beast consuming the meat of another, Coulter said, although I'll admit I glanced away at the start myself. I was sadder than I expected. Look at him going after the marrow. He doesn't want to waste a thing. I can't imagine eating something raw like that, Seth said. I can't imagine cooking it, Coulter replied. They watched as the giant picked the bones clean and sucked them dry. Here it comes, Coulter said, rubbing his hands. You'd think he'd be satisfied, but no matter how much fresh meat you give them, it just whets their appetite. The fog giant began rooting around on the ground, apparently lapping up what he could from the mud. Soon his face was masked with sludge and limp vegetation dangled from his lips. He began hammering his mighty fists against the soggy turf and throwing fragments of bone into the mist. He tossed back his head and let out a long, angry cry. He's going berserk, Seth said. The fog giant wheeled towards the dome, scowling. He picked up his club and charged, eyes ablaze. Seth felt totally exposed. With glass on all sides, held together by narrow strips of metal, it felt worse than no cover whatsoever. One swing of that club and the dome would explode toward him like 1,000 daggers. He recoiled and raised his arms to shield his face from flying glass. Coulter sat calmly beside him as if watching a movie. Racing at full speed, the giant lifted the club high above his head and brought it down with terrible force. Just before the club connected with the surface of the dome, it rebounded sharply, making an unnatural pinging sound, and sailed out of the giant's grasp. Burlock's forward momentum instantly reversed, and the giant pitched violently backwards. Shaken and seething, the fog giant arose and staggered away from the dome. As a hulking silhouette in the mist, Burlock began brutalizing a tree. He tore down the huge limbs and was soon pounding his fists against the sturdy trunk. Growling and groaning, he seized the trunk in a terrible embrace, twisting and wrenching and wrestling until the bowl began to split. With a final mighty heave, accompanied by a terrible crack, He toppled the entire tree and knelt, panting, hands on his knees. Incredible strength, Coulter commented. He should be cooling down by now. Sure enough, after a few moments, the giant trudged over and retrieved his club. Then he came and stood towering over the dome. Much of the mud had fallen from his face. After the food and the exertion, his complexion was ruddier. More, he demanded, pointing at his mouth. We agreed to a single buffalo, Coulter called to him. Burlax grimaced, revealing weeds and bark and fur in his teeth. He stamped a massive foot. More! It came across as a roar rather than a word. You said you knew a place Warren had been exploring before he turned white, Coulter said. We had a deal. More after, Burlax grunted threateningly. If we give you anything else, it will be out of kindness, not obligation. A deal is a deal. Was that buffalo not delicious? 4 hills, the giant spat before pivoting and stalking away. The 4 hills, Coulter repeated softly, watching the enormous figure vanish into the mist. He clapped Seth on the back. We just got what we came here for, my boy. A bona fide lead. All right. We're going to find out what Kendra is doing with Vanessa next time. Make sure you read this before you see the next, or listen to this before we do the next one.